After dark, you come home by climbing across your neighbor's roof. There is no street below, no doorway at ground level, only a square opening in the ceiling. You lower yourself through it, feet first, into the room beneath. That was how everyone arrived home. Why build a city this way? A visitor crossed several rooftops to reach you. A child carrying a basket of grain had to keep his balance above the sleeping rooms. If smoke thickened, or a wall began to crack, escape meant scrambling upward through the same hole, and hoping the roofs around you were clear. From above, the settlement looked less like a neighborhood than one continuous floor, patched together from mud, timber, and footprints. People walked over kitchens, storage rooms, and beds. They met beneath the sky, then disappeared downward into homes with no visible entrance. For thousands of years, this was ordinary life. Begin with a family waking before sunrise in a room no larger than a modern bedroom. The father reaches up to the ceiling, finds the wooden ladder, and climbs into the pale morning light. His wife follows with a clay bowl balanced against her hip. Below them, their two children stir beneath woven blankets, while the cooking fire sends a thin ribbon of smoke toward the roof opening. There is no front door to unlatch, no alley outside. The roof is the path. Across the packed rooftops, neighbors walk from one household to another, stepping over beams and low clay ridges. A woman calls to her sister. Someone carries a basket of grain. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks, then vanishes down another opening. From above, the settlement is a broad, uneven pavement made of sun-baked earth, timber, and ash. Inside, the family's life is compressed into a handful of rooms. They grind grain beside the fire, shape bread, repair tools, and sleep close together on raised platforms. The walls are plastered smooth with pale mud. Each year, after a crack appears or a fire blackens the ceiling, they spread on another coat. Fresh white plaster covers fingerprints, smoke stains, and the marks left by older hands. But the past does not disappear beneath the new surface. When the grandmother dies, the family lowers her into a shallow hollow beneath the sleeping platform. They place her carefully on her side, close to the room where she cooked and told stories. A few objects go with her: beads, a small vessel, perhaps a tool worn smooth by use. Then the opening is covered, packed and plastered over. The family returns to its meals. Children sleep above her. Feet cross the place where her body rests. Years pass. The children become parents. The room grows crowded, and the floor rises under repeated layers of plaster. A new platform is built above the old one. The hearth is repaired. A painted animal appears on the wall, its red shape glowing in the firelight. The household has not moved away. It has built upward, directly over itself. Beneath the newest floor lie the grandmother, broken pots, forgotten tools, ash, and the outlines of earlier rooms. Beneath those lie older relatives and older lives. Every repair adds another thin layer between the living and the dead. For this family, home is not a single room. It is a stack of generations, with today's footsteps pressing down on everything that came before. That layered home belonged to a place archaeologists now call Çatalhöyük, pronounced roughly Çatalhöyük. In central Anatolia, around 9,000 years ago, Neolithic families built one of the largest settlements of their age. At its height, thousands of people lived there, packed into mud brick houses that touched and overlapped like blocks in a wall. There were no ordinary streets running between them. No outward-facing doors opened onto sidewalks. Instead, movement happened across the roofs. A person climbed onto the flat roof of one home, crossed to the next, and lowered themselves through a ceiling opening. The roof was walkway, work surface, lookout, and entrance all at once. Inside, rooms held hearths, storage bins, plastered walls, and the remains of earlier occupants beneath the floor. From above, Çatalhöyük may have looked less like a city of separate buildings than a continuous mound of homes, stitched together by footsteps overhead. There was no front gate waiting at ground level, no lane leading to a familiar doorstep. The lower walls of one house pressed directly against the next, forming a packed block of mud brick with only occasional gaps, narrow enough for a person to squeeze through, and too awkward for carts, herds, or anything resembling a regular street. The real movement happened above. A person could climb a ladder from the main room to the roof, step across the flattened clay surface, and walk toward another household without touching the ground. Roof edges became thresholds. A neighboring roof might serve as a route, a work area, or a place to pause and speak with someone below. In a settlement built this way, the city's circulation system was not drawn across the earth. It was spread across the ceilings. The houses themselves were compact and tightly joined. Walls were built from sun-dried mud bricks coated with plaster and repaired again and again. Inside, several rooms might surround a main living space with a hearth for cooking and warmth. Above that hearth, an opening in the ceiling served two purposes at once. People entered through it, and smoke escaped through it. Daylight came down the same shaft, especially in a room with no large window. But this was not a doorway in the modern sense. It was a controlled passage between two levels. A rough wooden ladder, perhaps no more than stout poles fixed into the wall, could be pulled up or left in place. Steps might be pressed into plaster or packed earth. A visitor crossing the roof would descend into the room. A family member could send a basket, a bundle of fuel, or even a sleeping child back up through the same opening. That immediately created a strange question. If the roof was the route into a house, who controlled the route? The answer began with the hearth. Smoke rose toward the ceiling and drifted out, while fresh air entered around the edges. It was practical, but hardly comfortable. Soot darkened the opening. Ash and cooking fumes settled on the ceiling. Burning dung or wood filled the room with a smell that would cling to hair, clothing, and food. On a cold night, closing the opening helped preserve heat, but it also trapped smoke beside the people sleeping below. A family could be warm, fed, and half blinded at the same time. The roof offered more than access. It became a working surface. Grain spread beneath the sun, meat dried on mats, baskets were repaired, tools were shaped, and food was prepared in the open air. Jars, fuel, and bundles could sit there during the day. Someone might rest beside a low parapet, watching movement across the neighboring roofs, while a child crossed the packed clay under the eyes of several households. That child was not walking down a street. The child was moving across someone else's ceiling. This made privacy vertical rather than horizontal. In a modern settlement, the boundary is easy to read: sidewalk, gate, door, room. At Çatalhöyük one roof could be a root, while the opening beneath it belonged to a particular household. A person might cross another family's ceiling without entering their room, but a ladder descending through that ceiling was a far more intimate intrusion. Visitors had to know where they could walk, where they could pause, and which openings were not theirs to use. A footstep overhead could be ordinary, or it could announce a stranger. Animals made the arrangement harder still. Cattle, sheep, and goats belonged to daily life around the settlement. Yet the compact rooms were not designed like modern barns. Some animals may have stayed in nearby enclosures or open areas. Meanwhile, hides, dung, bones, and food moved through the same dense domestic world as people. A roof route meant animals did not have to be driven through every narrow interior passage, but it did not remove the noise, flies, odors, or danger. One startled animal near an edge could turn a routine movement into a disaster. The connected construction brought real benefits. Shared walls required fewer bricks than isolated buildings. They reduced exposed surfaces, held warmth during cold nights, and allowed more homes to occupy less ground. Dense construction may also have offered protection. There were fewer obvious approaches for strangers, and no broad road carrying animals, vehicles, or rival groups directly into the center. Yet the same design could turn one household's problem into everyone's problem. Fire could leap from roof to roof. A damaged wall might threaten an entire cluster. Rainwater had to be guided away from flat roofs and narrow seams, or it would soften the mud brick above the rooms below. A slick roof, a broken ladder, or an unguarded edge could make an ordinary trip deadly. There was no separate service route for ash, waste, or spoiled food. Every household had to solve those problems inside a crowded vertical system with neighbors close enough to hear. And smell the result. And beneath every repaired surface, the past remained in place. When a room became too low, too damaged, or too dirty, residents could fill it, level it, and lay a new floor above the old one. The ceiling opening shifted upward. A roof became the floor of a later house. A wall that had divided one household space might disappear beneath the next generation's feet. The settlement did not simply grow outward. It grew upward, one buried room at a time. To someone expecting freestanding buildings, Çatalhöyük might seem to have misplaced its streets. Its residents had not abandoned circulation. They had moved it overhead, trading open roads for shared walls, compact warmth, and a maze of roofs that demanded constant negotiation. Then the same construction process began changing what the city physically was. A damaged house was not necessarily cleared away. People repaired it, replastered it, narrowed an opening, raised a floor, or built directly over what already stood there. The old building became the base of a new one. The floor beneath a family's feet might conceal rooms, hearths, and belongings from generations before. That process repeated for centuries. The city's oldest houses did not disappear beneath the settlement. They became the ground it walked on. Each rebuilding episode added another thin layer of earth, plaster, ash, broken brick, animal bone, spilled grain, discarded tools, and the fragments of ordinary life. A house might be swept clean, but never perfectly. Dust gathered in corners. A burnt beam collapsed. A wall was knocked down and packed into the floor. New plaster covered stains, cracks, fingerprints, and traces of the people who had lived there before. Over time, the settlement became a mound nearly 20 meters high in places. No single ruler ordered its construction. Families simply raised a floor, filled an old storage pit, thickened a wall, or divided a room. Thousands of small repairs slowly turned the city into something built from its own past. For archaeologists, that creates a rare kind of evidence, sealed moments. When a later floor covers an earlier one, objects left below can remain in position for thousands of years. A broken bowl may mark the last activity in a household. A cluster of grinding stones can show where food was prepared. Charred seeds can reveal what was stored, burned, or swept into a corner. Sometimes the evidence is even stranger. A buried wall can preserve the shape of a room that had already vanished when the upper settlement was occupied. A doorway sealed by later construction records a change in how people moved through the house. A platform raised by only a few centimeters may show that one spot remained important while everything around it changed. The mound works like a stack of pages, but the pages are torn, folded, and covered with fingerprints. To read one level, archaeologists have to separate the moment it was built from the older memories trapped beneath it. This made the household more than a place to live. It became a location that children inherited. A child born in Çatalhöyük might grow up beneath the same patch of roof where a parent had slept, worked, and buried a relative. The walls could be rebuilt, but the footprint often stayed familiar. One generation enlarged a room. Another covered it with fresh white plaster. A third repainted a surface or removed an older feature. The house changed without becoming entirely new. People would have known the house through their feet and hands. They knew where the floor dipped, because an earlier wall lay beneath it. They knew which platform had been rebuilt. Again and again, which corner had once held a hearth, which opening led to the roof, and which surface needed another coat of plaster. None of this required writing. The history of the house was encountered every day. In some rooms, repeated plastering produced dozens of bright surfaces layered one over another. The newest white coating hid older marks, but it also protected them. A painted design could vanish from sight while remaining embedded in the architecture. A repair could preserve the outline of a former room. Even when residents changed the house, they were working inside a structure that already carried a history. Objects became part of that history, too. A tool lost beneath a floor, a fragment swept into construction fill, or a vessel placed in a sealed space could disappear from daily life in an instant. To the people who left them behind, these were used things, damaged things, forgotten things. Once covered, they became a record of how the household had functioned at one particular moment. Rebuilding did not erase the past. It compressed it. At Çatalhöyük, ancestry was not only a story about distant predecessors. It was a wall beneath the wall, a floor beneath the floor, a familiar room altered but never fully detached from what came before. Every new household inherited the same physical challenge: how to make a living space from the remains of another one. That is why the settlement's height matters. The mound was not simply the result of people staying in one place. It was the visible shape of people returning to the same places, generation after generation, and building their future on top of their domestic past. But the deepest layers of that past were not only walls and objects. They were human bodies. Earlier occupants were placed below the floors, under platforms, beside walls, and beneath the raised surfaces where daily life continued. A person could cook above one burial, sleep above another, and sit with the household on a plastered bench that concealed generations of the dead. The burials at Çatalhöyük were usually tightly arranged, with bodies placed on their sides and limbs drawn inward. Some were wrapped or covered before the grave was closed. Infants and adults appeared together. In certain houses, archaeologists found only a few burials. In others, the number was far higher, suggesting that some rooms had become favored places for returning the dead to the ground. The living were not merely occupying an old settlement. They were carrying on with breakfast, repairs, sleep, and conversation directly above the people who had made that life possible. But the bodies did not always remain untouched. When a new grave was dug, older bones could be disturbed. In some cases, skulls appear to have been removed, transferred, and buried again. Red ochre and other pigments appear in some contexts, while other burials contain no obvious decoration at all. A body might receive careful treatment, then be moved years later when the room was renovated. The grave was not a sealed chamber at the edge of town. It remained beneath the household, vulnerable to every new floor, wall, and burial placed above it. That arrangement changes the meaning of the word home. In a modern house, the floor separates the living from whatever lies below. At Çatalhöyük, the floor could act as a membrane between two parts of the same community. The dead were hidden, but not distant. Their presence was built into the room's architecture. A mother grinding grain above an infant, a sleeper resting over an ancestor, children crossing a plastered platform that concealed human bones. These scenes cannot be recovered directly, but the houses leave little room for a clean division between domestic routine and mortuary practice. Cooking, sleeping, craft work, conversation, and burial all occupied the same compact interior. The question is not only why people buried their dead beneath houses. It is also which dead belonged there. Some burial groups may represent members of a household linked by residence, kinship, or shared ritual obligations. Yet the pattern is not simple. A single building could contain an infant, an adult, and an older person who did not form the neat family group modern observers might expect. Genetic studies have not always matched that assumption. Certain individuals were buried more than once, while others may have been moved between houses or burial areas. The evidence suggests belonging, but it does not provide a family register carved into the floor. Nor do the graves reveal a clear ranking of the kind found in royal tombs or monumental cemeteries. There were no towering mausoleums marking a ruling dynasty. Grave goods were limited and unevenly distributed. One burial might include beads, shells, tools, or pigment. The next might contain almost nothing visible. That difference could reflect age, gender, occupation, ritual treatment, social standing, or simply what survived thousands of years underground. A rich-looking burial does not automatically identify a king. A modest one does not prove low status. The rooms themselves offer another clue. Some were repeatedly replastered, their walls smoothed and painted again after years of use. If a burial lay below a platform, each fresh layer of plaster could cover it more deeply while keeping the same spot active. A child could grow up stepping over the same hidden grave that adults had already crossed for years. The household was not merely occupying a structure. It was maintaining a relationship with a particular patch of ground where remembered people remain physically present without being displayed. This creates a striking tension. Above the floor was an ordinary room, ash near a hearth, fingerprints in plaster, tools left from work, traces of food and fire. Below it was a hidden mortuary history, accumulated one body at a time. The room could be practical and sacred, familiar and unsettling, without either description canceling the other. In that world, a cemetery was not necessarily a separate district. A family archive was not made of written records, but of bodies, bones, pigments, and rebuilding. A sacred place could be the same room where someone slept through the night. The categories modern cities keep apart, home, graveyard, shrine, and family memorial, could overlap beneath a single roof, and that overlap may explain why rebuilding mattered so much. To raise a new room was also to settle above old occupants. Each generation inherited more than walls and packed earth. It inherited a floor carrying the memory of people who had been placed there, concealed there, and perhaps visited through ritual long after their burial. The dead were not outside the settlement. They were inside its foundations, beneath the lives that continued above them. And yet, for a settlement this large, another absence is just as striking as the people beneath the floors. There is no obvious palace above them. At its height, Çatalhöyük may have held several thousand residents, perhaps close to 8,000 across the wider settlement. That scale raises a familiar question. Who coordinated all those households? Who decided where new rooms would be built, how food would be stored, how disputes would be settled, or when the community would move together? In many early settlements the answer is written into the architecture. A ruler occupies a larger residence. Officials work inside a central administrative building. A temple rises above ordinary houses. Defensive walls mark the power to control movement, and differences in house size reveal who commands more labor, land, or food. At Çatalhöyük, archaeologists have found no grand avenue leading to a royal compound, no fortified citadel, and no single district that clearly dominates the rest. The buildings repeat the same basic grammar. Rooms clustered around hearths, ovens, benches, storage spaces, and small entrances in the ceiling. Some houses were rebuilt again and again, but they do not resolve into a palace quarter. The settlement seems to spread through countless household-sized units, rather than gathering around one commanding center. That does not mean nobody had influence. It means influence may not have been stamped into one enormous building. A powerful family might have controlled extra animals, better tools, or more reliable access to obsidian from volcanic Cappadocia. A skilled hunter, healer, craft worker, or ritual specialist could have carried authority without leaving behind a throne. Respect may have followed age, ancestry, knowledge, or the ability to host a feast. A household with a long history in one location might have mattered more than a newer one, even if its walls looked almost identical. The evidence is subtle. Some houses contain more animal horns, painted surfaces, or unusual objects than others. Certain rooms were cleaned, replastered, and decorated with unusual care. Burials accumulated beneath some floors, turning those rooms into places with a remembered past. That history may have given a household prestige. But prestige is not a government office, and a respected household is not automatically a palace. The community may have operated through agreements repeated at a smaller scale. Families could coordinate planting, herding, hunting, construction, and burial without a permanent bureaucracy. Neighbors sharing walls and rooftops had reasons to settle conflicts. If one family blocked a passage, damaged a roof, or filled the air with smoke, everyone nearby felt it. Custom, gossip, kinship, and the threat of losing cooperation may have enforced the rules. Consider what happened when a roof needed repair. One household could not simply rebuild in isolation if neighbors used that roof as a walkway. People had to coordinate where to climb, where to store materials, and which opening led into which room. The settlement worked like a stack of connected homes, but nobody appears to have stood at the center issuing instructions. A village council, a group of senior households, temporary leaders, or ritual gatherings could have handled particular problems. During a hunt, one person led. During a building project, another organized labor. During a ceremony, a specialist directed the performance. The next morning everyone returned to their own hearth. Authority appeared when needed, then dissolved back into domestic life. That kind of arrangement is difficult to see in the ground because it leaves no single signature. A palace leaves thick walls, restricted rooms, storage facilities, and grand entrances. A flexible agreement leaves repeated houses, repaired roofs, shared habits, and a community that keeps doing the same things for centuries. Still, the absence of a palace should not become a story of perfect equality. Çatalhöyük was not a world where every person necessarily owned the same resources or held the same voice. Some households may have had more labor, more livestock, more valuable materials, or stronger links to distant exchange networks. Men and women may have taken on different tasks or gained authority in different settings. Children born into established households may have inherited advantages that outsiders could not easily acquire. Even the houses themselves could preserve inequality without becoming visibly grand. A family might receive more visitors, control a better storage area, or claim a room with greater symbolic importance. Reputation could accumulate across generations. A house known for its ancestors, feasts, skilled makers, or ritual knowledge might attract loyalty without needing guards at the door. So here is the contradiction. 8,000 people may have lived together, unequal in resources and influence, yet without an obvious command center. Population creates logistical problems, but it does not dictate the form of power. A large settlement can be organized through ranked officials and monumental buildings. It can also be held together by households, obligations, inherited reputation, and rules so familiar that nobody needs to carve them into stone. At Çatalhöyük, the missing palace is not an empty space in the evidence. It is a clue. Power may have moved through rooms, rooftops, kin groups, ceremonies, and families who had occupied the same ground for generations. But where would that authority become visible? Not in a throne room. On the walls. Inside some houses, plaster was applied again and again, smoothing over soot, stains, fingerprints, and the traces of daily life. Then someone added a red line, a geometric pattern, a row of shapes, or the image of an animal. In one room, the horns of wild cattle were fixed into a plastered installation, projecting from the wall like the skull of a powerful creature preserved indoors. Elsewhere, teeth, bones, shells, feathers, and fragments of stone were set into surfaces, or, gathered in, carefully arranged deposits. These were not houses filled with decoration in the modern sense. The images were unevenly distributed. Some rooms carried several layers of painting and plaster. Others were plain. A few contained installations that had been repaired, repainted, or rebuilt over long periods, as though the room itself had acquired a history that demanded maintenance. That creates a second mystery. Were these images private decorations, family symbols, or something shared by the whole settlement? Some of the most striking walls show wild cattle with enormous horns. Leopards emerge in bold, spotted forms. Vultures and other birds appear in scenes that may connect to death, exposure, or the treatment of bodies. There are human figures, hunting scenes, and shapes whose meaning remains uncertain. Archaeologists can describe the pigment, the line, and the position. They cannot simply ask the painted animal what it meant to the people who lived beside it. That uncertainty matters. A bull's horns might have marked courage, danger, a successful hunt, or a relationship with the animal world. They may have belonged to a ceremony performed in that room. Or they may have been part of a story repeated to children, neighbors, and guests. One installation could be sacred, social, practical, or all three at once. The word shrine has often been used for the more elaborate rooms, especially those filled with dense imagery, built features, and unusual objects. But the label can mislead. It suggests a separate religious building somewhere removed from ordinary life. At Çatalhöyük, these rooms were woven into the houses themselves. People cooked nearby, repaired tools, stored food, slept, gave birth, worked hides, and buried their dead beneath the same roof. A room could change character by the hour. In the morning, a platform might hold sleeping mats. Later, that same space could receive a visitor, a meal, an animal hide, or a body prepared for burial. A wall image could be seen while someone ground grain. Horns could tower above people as they talked, worked, and moved through the room. That is why the house matters more than any single object. The entrance overhead, the hearth, the storage bins, the benches, the platforms, the burials beneath them, even the plaster, repeatedly applied and worn away. Meaning was created through movement and repetition, not through one isolated artifact. Over time, a household could claim a room through those repeated acts. Its residents maintained the plaster, reopened the floor, added another burial, and returned objects to familiar places. They might remember which wall carried an old image, where an ancestor lay, and which installation belonged to a story told for generations. Then the house became something unexpected, an archive without writing. Its records were layered in dust, pigment, bone, ash, and repair. But this archive did not merely preserve memory. It could announce who belonged there. A household with distinctive animal imagery, unusual objects, or carefully maintained installations may have presented itself differently from the house next door, not necessarily as richer or more powerful. Its difference might have pointed to ancestry, skill, age, memory, or a connection to particular animals and places. Obsidian tools, shell ornaments, animal teeth, pigments, and carved objects moved through these interiors. Some traveled from distant regions. Others came from nearby. A rare object might be worn, displayed, buried, broken, or slipped beneath a floor. Its value depended not only on the material, but on whose hands touched it and at what moment. Burial made those choices even harder to erase. Someone was placed beneath a platform. The surface was sealed. Then meals were cooked, tools were repaired, and children played above the body. Years later, the floor could be opened again for another burial. A single room might hold several generations. People living above relatives they had never met, yet physically standing on their presence every day. That detail changes the meaning of the house. The dead were not sent to a distant cemetery. They remained beneath the household while the household continued around them. Art, in this setting, may not have been a separate task performed by specialists. Painting, plastering, arranging bones, shaping tools, and caring for the dead could all belong to one cycle of domestic work. The people who made the images may also have been the people who cooked, hunted, traded, and slept beneath them. Still, no single explanation accounts for every installation. Some paintings may have signaled household prestige. Others may have accompanied ceremonies. Some may have been touched, covered, and renewed until the act mattered more than the original image. A few may simply have made a room recognizable and beautiful to the people who lived there. The pattern is clearer than any one meaning. Çatalhöyük concentrated its symbols inside houses because that was where belonging was performed, witnessed, repaired, and remembered. Its walls did not proclaim one central authority. They recorded thousands of smaller claims. This room, these dead, these animals, these stories, this household. And every claim was made beneath a roof in a city where the most public statements were hidden inside private rooms. But a rooftop world could survive only while the ground around it supplied what the houses could not. Çatalhöyük stood beside the wetlands of the Konya plain, where people could grow crops, gather reeds, hunt, herd animals, and draw on water close to home. That landscape was not permanent. Across the centuries, rainfall patterns changed. Wet areas contracted or shifted. The balance between fields, pasture, and marsh became harder to maintain. The city's dense layout turned that environmental pressure into a housing problem. When one household needed more storage, more animals, or more workspace, it could not simply move into a street or spread across an empty lot. There was no open neighborhood waiting beside it. The only available space was above, crowding the roofs, raising the living surfaces, and narrowing the passages between homes. The same design that had protected the community now left it with a dangerous question. What happens when a city built to fit tightly together has nowhere left to grow? That arrangement had once been efficient. Roofs kept movement above muddy ground. They connected neighboring homes without giving outsiders an easy way inside. But efficiency can turn into pressure when every new demand arrives in the same small space. More people meant more grain to store, more animals to feed, more fuel to gather, and more waste to carry away. The city did not need a single disaster to become difficult. It only needed the margins to grow thinner. The evidence appears in small changes. Houses were rebuilt more often in some periods, while other areas became less tightly packed. Rooms were altered, abandoned, or filled in. So much of the clean rhythm of one dwelling pressed against another began to loosen. Open areas appeared where dense blocks had once dominated, and activities that once happened inside the home seemed to have moved beyond its walls. Water may have sharpened the problem. Çatalhöyük had no monumental wells and no visible central water system. People likely collected water from nearby sources and carried it back across the settlement. A short walk works when the source is close and reliable. But if a channel shifted, a spring weakened, or the wetland edge receded, every household paid the price. Someone had to make that longer walk, carrying heavy jars through the landscape and then up into the house. That was not just an inconvenience. It changed who had time to work, who stayed home, and how closely neighbors had to cooperate. Food production changed, too. Earlier layers contain evidence of hunting, including the powerful wild cattle that became part of the settlement's visual and ritual life. Over time, herding sheep and goats became more significant, while farming remained tied to wheat, barley, peas, and lentils. This was not a clean replacement of one economy by another. It was a slow rebalancing, shaped by seasons, animal needs, labor, and the condition of the land. A rooftop network favored people moving lightly between households. It was less suited to managing larger herds, storing bulkier supplies, or keeping animals away from sleeping and working areas. Sheep and goats needed space beyond the walls. Fields needed access. Herds needed roots. The more life moved outside, the less useful the inward-facing city became. And then there was population. At its height, Çatalhöyük may have held several thousand people, perhaps around 8,000 in the largest estimates. That number was never a permanent guarantee. Families split, new households formed. Others disappeared. Some people may have left for nearby settlements, carrying familiar tools, crops, animals, and building habits with them. Here is the unexpected part: fewer occupied houses do not automatically mean thousands of people died there. The settlement may have been thinning because people were moving away. A family could carry its storage jars, tools, and animals to a new place, leaving behind a house that still stood but no longer belonged to the network. The city might not have been emptied by catastrophe. It may have been unthreaded, household by household. The relationships between households could change without leaving a dramatic signature. When people shared a dense roofscape, cooperation was useful. Neighbors coordinated movement, exchanged food, repaired walls, and helped manage children and animals. But crowded adjacency also created friction. A blocked passage, a collapsing wall, a growing herd, a dispute over access. Any one of these could turn a shared system into a burden. The more households depended on one another, the more vulnerable the arrangement became when trust, population, or resources shifted. There is no need to place an invading army at the end of this story. Archaeologists have not found the kind of evidence that would demand one final massacre. No single destruction layer, sweeping across the entire settlement, no clear moment when the rooftops went silent at once. Instead, the record suggests uneven change. Some houses continued. Others were remodeled. Some spaces were left behind. People adjusted, withdrew, or moved into new patterns of settlement. That may be the harder ending to see, because gradual change leaves no cinematic final scene. A household stops rebuilding one wall. A family carries its storage jars away. A roof passage becomes useless when the neighboring house is no longer occupied. One departure makes the next departure easier until the network that once made dense living practical no longer works in the same way. The architecture had been remarkably resilient. It protected privacy, concentrated labor, and turned roofs into shared circulation routes. Yet its strength depended on a particular combination of water, food, population, cooperation, and available space. Change any one of those conditions, and the same design begins demanding more than it gives. Çatalhöyük did not necessarily collapse. It loosened. The packed settlement became one option among several, and eventually people chose arrangements that better matched the world around them. The rooftops had carried the community for centuries. They could not carry it forever. But what if Çatalhöyük was never meant to become a city in the first place? There may have been no founding moment, no master plan scratched onto a clay tablet, no leader pointing across the plain and marking where the streets should run. Instead, one household built a room. Later, another family raised its walls beside it. A house was repaired, enlarged, abandoned, or rebuilt directly over the old one. Then the same process began again. Generation after generation, the settlement thickened through thousands of small decisions, and that so much of motion. The result looked planned from above because every new structure had to fit around the structures already there. But fitting around an older home is not the same as following a city plan. It is negotiation made visible in mud brick. A doorway could not simply open onto a road because there was no road to receive it. Movement passed over the roofs, down through a ladder opening, and into the rooms below. That arrangement may have begun as a practical response to crowding. Over time, it became part of how people understood home itself. The roof was a path, a work surface, a meeting place, and perhaps a threshold between the living household and the wider community. Below it, the rooms held ovens, storage bins, wall paintings, buried ancestors, and the marks of repeated ceremonies. A house was not an isolated box. It was a layered history that families inherited, changed, and sometimes built over. In that world, the settlement did not need a palace to hold it together. Its order could be carried by households remembering where they belonged, whose bones lay beneath the floor and which neighbors shared the next roof. This helps explain why archaeologists find such density without finding a single civic center. Çatalhöyük may have grown the way a conversation grows, one exchange answered by another, each shaped by what came before. No one had to announce, "We are building a city." They only had to keep building homes, returning to familiar rooms, and making space beside the people already there. The strange absence of streets and rulers may not mark an incomplete city. It may reveal a different one, created from accumulated households rather than imposed from above. At Çatalhöyük, thousands of people shared one settlement, yet the signs modern eyes expect from a city are missing. There is no palace raised above the homes, no royal tomb, no straight avenue leading to a public center, and no ruler whose name survives in stone. What held the place together was less visible. Neighbors accepting the same roof paths, households rebuilding on the same ground, and families carrying out rituals in rooms that had belonged to others before them. The settlement was not held together by a throne. It was held together by memory, repetition, and the rules of living wall against wall. That is why Çatalhöyük unsettles the familiar definition of a city. It did not lack organization. Its organization was embedded in houses. It did not lack public space. People crossed above the rooms, sharing the same network of roofs. Even the boundary between home and street had disappeared, so the mystery has one last turn. The people of Çatalhöyük did not enter through the roof because their city had no streets. They entered through the roof because, in their city, the roofs were the streets.